the Appalachian Bear Rescue. It's kind of awkward right now talking to bear folks and not going to be talking about bears today. I was very pleased that I was invited to talk about some of my other favorite animals, which I'm a large carnivore biologist at heart. So besides bears, I love talking about cougars and wolves and all those predator-like animals. And so when I sent Katrina and Greg here a list of all the talks I do, and they chose this one. So if you don't like this, folks, you can blame them. But I will tell you, I'm going to give you fair warning. I love giving this talk in person because I could communicate with the people better, see their reaction, but I'm also feeling a little bit safer here because of all the talks I give. This is one that's liable to have something thrown at me, so I'll warn you here. So anyway, today's talk, I wanted to just sit here and chat with you about a couple of different critters that you hear often about living in North America, and that's the Black Panther or the Eastern Cougar. And so we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about these two animals. And just before we get started, I always like giving a little bit of background information because there's a lot of people on social media today that they're spouting all this information and they're teaching people, and in many, many situations, they're teaching people some really crappy stuff. And so there's a lot of misinformation that's floating out there because of social media and the interwebs. There's a lot of folks that really don't have the credentials to teach some of these subjects. But I do want everyone to know, after my time working at the Bear Center back in the late 1990s, I went on, I already had my degree in wildlife biology, but after working at the Appalachian Bear Center, went on to become the big game program coordinator for the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. And so I was over the deer, bear, and elk programs. After that, I did that for almost 9 years. And after that, I did about 5 years as the chief of wildlife for the state of Tennessee. And then I was bitten by the bug of wanting to do something out west. I always, as a little boy, wanted to live and work out west. And so for the last 10 years or so, I've been living my dream, still working as a wildlife biologist for the federal agencies here. I'm currently here in Utah. So I do have lots of experience working with these animals. So what I'm going to be teaching you is based on science. It's not based on me staying at a hotel somewhere. So we're going to get this presentation started with a disclaimer, because we will be talking about these Black Panthers and these cougars in the East. And I promise you, folks, I know, I have no doubt there's folks sitting out there right now that have seen one of these animals. I will tell you that I will never tell you what you saw. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong, this is what you saw. But I will mention most likely what you didn't see. And that's going to be the basis of this presentation. Now, I regret that the videos that I was going to play for you aren't going to work. We tested it out and we don't have the audio. But for anyone that has experience, and this is a question to, and Greg or Katrina, you could yell this out too, but for folks that have seen or have experienced a Black Panther, especially if they heard one off in the distance at night, what do they say it sounds like?
Nails on a chalkboard make all the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Or a woman screaming.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the two videos that we can't get to play here, the one is that high-pitched woman screaming, and there's two likely culprits for that in North America. The first one is predominantly a red fox. Believe it or not, they have this high-pitched scream or a high-pitched bark that off in the distance sounds like a woman yelping or screaming down in the holler. The other video I was going to play is an actual Black Panther and they are not high pitched at all. They're a guttural growl, a roar. They're one of the cats that actually can roar. And so it's a vastly different sound than when people come up and say, oh, we heard a Black Panther in the valley. It sounded like a woman screaming. As soon as they say that, you pretty much know it probably wasn't what they thought it was. And so what I was going to do is, why do people automatically go to this Black Panther-like creature? Why is that their first thought of what the sound is? Or if they see this animal in the distance, they automatically go to this creature called a Black Panther. So let's start this discussion by let's talk about what are Black Panthers. And just so everyone is crystal clear on this, what a Black Panther is, it's a melanistic version of either a leopard, which are found in Africa or Southeast Asia. And when I say a melanistic version, it's just a black coloration. Like an albino is a white animal, a melanistic animal is a black animal. So it's the melanistic version of a leopard, which is found on the other side of the ocean, Africa and Southeast Asia, or it's the melanistic version of a jaguar, which are mostly found in South and Central America. Those two large cats they're known to be melanistic, to carry that black trait. And so you can see right away, they're typically not found where we live here. And so although I say they're not found in North America, there's a little asterisk with that I'm going to get into in a second. But typically those cats, leopards and jaguars, you're not finding them, especially in the eastern half of the US. So many people say, well, it wasn't a black jaguar that I saw. It was a black mountain lion that I saw. Contrary to what many people believe it or not, there has never been a documented case of a black cougar anywhere in the history of the world. Now, it is said they don't carry the gene to be melanistic. And I try to find papers. There's lots of suggestions. But with genes, there's always that potential slight possibility. So I can't tell you with 100% certainty that they can never be black, but just know that a cougar or a puma or a mountain lion, whatever name you call them for those big cats in North America, they have never been documented to be melanistic or be black. So let's jump back to the jaguar, because this is the only possibility of what people think they're seeing in North America. Now, the jaguar it's one of the 4 large cats in the Panthera genus, and that's where the term panther comes from. Just so you know, a cougar is not in the genus Panthera. It's actually in the genus Concolor. So it's not even classified as one of the 4 large cats. But the jaguar, if you do look at North America, this is why I said there's a little asterisk. Their current range, they do come up through Central America and up into Mexico. For the longest time, I was thinking North America didn't include Mexico, and people started correcting me. So that's why I'm like, oh, Mexico is part of North America. I was thinking anyway. So the jaguar does come up into Mexico, this red area. And you can see that it extends along the mountain range and even comes up a tiny, tiny portion right along that Arizona-New Mexico border. So if you follow the news, or if you're a big wildlife advocate, you probably hear of these occasional jaguar sightings in Arizona and occasionally in New Mexico. There's only a couple. There was a real famous one called El Jefe that they saw about 10, 11 years ago. I don't know if El Jefe is still around, but there's been 3 or 4 others. They're almost entirely all male, but they do come up to that border area. So the jaguar, the regular color looking jaguar, can actually reach the United States, but we've only had a couple of documented cases within the last couple of decades. So technically, if a jaguar could come up to the U.S., technically, why can't a Black Panther exist in the U.S.? And that's a really good question, right? Here's the thing. There's been studies done on the melanism, the black coloration in these large cats. And what they find out is that coloration is almost exclusively retained in those cats that live in heavy, dark, jungle type environments. And you have to understand, if it's a jungle, there's lots of shadows, so that dark coloration is a really, really good adaptation, and it will actually help those cats. Now, guess what that northern part of Mexico looks like in southern Arizona and southern New Mexico? It is desert. It is hot. If you've ever been down there in Arizona in midsummer, you could reach temperatures of 110, even 120 degrees. Can you imagine being a large mammal with a black fur coat? So melanistic jaguars, excuse me, have never, ever been documented in the United States, in North America even. There's one supposed sighting in Mexico, but that one is even debated. So anyway, the likelihood of having a jaguar and a black jaguar is almost zero when it comes to the United States. So
Daryl, before you move on from the jaguar, the historic range of the jaguar was almost all the way to like the Louisiana border, with, right? It did go just over the Mississippi River there, maybe.
Yeah, and I've been reading a bunch of documents actually within the last couple of weeks. It 100% absolutely was Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, reaches Louisiana, and then there are historical records from the first explorers that they talk to people and they describe these spotted cats. And obviously the mountain lion is not a spotted cat. And so it's debatable because how far up they went, because some people will actually claim they went up all the way through the Appalachians, but those are just verbal records. There's been no fossil evidence or anything like that found that far. But as far as those Gulf states from Louisiana, even Alabama, Mississippi, even all the way into Florida, it's definitely possible.
I thought I saw something that said, Florida Panhandle was talked about like in stories, but evidence wise, there's really not much more evidence than Louisiana or something, but they could have been further.
And it's hard to take their exact word for it, because the one account I was reading was like from 1720, and they talked about they encountered 3 different cats on their trip. They encountered a catamount, a cougar, and a tiger.
Yeah.
So well, first off, 2 of those are the exact same animals. So it's just, there must be a physical evidence.
They called it a tiger with a T-Y. Didn't they spell it T-Y?
Yeah, and there's a long account about how Europeans would use that term. It's the same like they called they called moose elk over in Europe. So anyway, the thing is, and I should have mentioned this on the talk, that as a biologist, we have to go by physical and hard evidence. So reading written word of people or verbal word of people, we can't use that as hard evidence to say 100% they were here. We need that physical evidence to back it up. So I'm gonna jump into some physical evidence, because my time in Tennessee, I had so much fun in Tennessee doing some of the things I used to do. When I was a big game coordinator, I got calls about cougars and Black Panthers all the time. And typically when people would call in and say, oh, we have a Black Panther sighting, we'd try to explain that's not likely to occur unless it was someone's escaped pet. And this one woman called in and she was persistent, and we tried explaining. So instead of calling us, she started calling the governor. And the director of the agency said, Daryl, can you please go visit this person? So went out there, and she insisted she had a Black Panther, and I hung a camera looking over the back part of her field. And I took this photo, and I don't know if you could see it, but there's a little black thing here. And I saw that, and I'm like, huh, I wonder. And I convinced myself it was just a bird that was flying across the screen. And so then I came across another series of photos, which this might be darker, and I don't know how well you could see it here, but right where the pointer is, there's a little black dot, and I'm going to move that little black dot. I'm going back and forth. You could actually see it move through the grass. So then I'm like, okay, she's seeing something. I don't know what it is. I was pretty convinced it wasn't a Black Panther. So I ended up moving the cameras to the back part of the field to get better pictures. And just so you know, this is your your government expenses were paying for me to do all this. So I set up the cameras at the back of her property, and after a week or so, I captured this image. And I don't know if you can see it here, but I'm like, that's a dog in the field. It looks like a yellow lab. And sure enough, the next photo was the yellow lab's buddy. It was a black lab. And so I got a bunch of photos of these dogs running around in the back part of her property. So it was like, I love doing the sleuthing of this to figure out what they're seeing. They're not happy that I kind of debunk what they saw, but they did appreciate me coming out there. Well, lo and behold, Greg, the following year, she sends me another picture, and she's like, aha, I got a photo of that Black Panther. And if you look in the bottom right corner of this, there's an animal sitting there. And so I looked at it, I'm like, huh, I can see it. Don't know what it is. It's not a very, the one thing you find out, they never send you really clear pictures. But if you look closely at it, you can see this animal kind of sitting on its haunches, fairly large, I believe. I don't know if that's vegetation or what's on the chest there, but I'm examining this, and I'm wondering if I got to go set up another camera over here. And then as I'm talking to her, she's like, oh, do you want to see the pictures of the wolf I got?
Nice.
I would love to see the pictures of the wolf. So she took me to, she brought out her laptop, and she was showing me this wolf. And right away I told her, I said, ma'am, that's more than likely a melanistic coyote, because we have plenty of those in Tennessee. The wolves aren't known to come down to Tennessee. And so the cool thing, as I'm flicking through all these pictures, the very last one is the picture of the melanistic coyote, and you can see on his chest this little white blaze. And so if you go back to that other picture, it has that little white mark on its chest and a little white mark on its chest. So again, it was one of those sleuthing things. You could put a feather in your cap, say, ah. And so we pretty much concluded that too was not a Black Panther. So bottom line, when it comes to these Black Panther sightings, given the fact that we don't have any documentation of Black Panthers ever existing in North America, and jaguars being in that Central America right now, it's very, very unlikely that you're going to be seeing a Black Panther in the East, unless, and I got to put that little caveat, someone has an exotic pet that they bought and that escapes, but usually you find out about that pretty quick. So when it comes to seeing these animals, we can't tell you what that black cat was that you saw, but like I said, we can likely tell you most likely what it wasn't. So Black Panthers, as many stories as we get, there's never been any confirmation of free-ranging wild Black Panthers in North America. Do you guys have any questions about the Black Panther?
We had 2 questions pop up just a little bit ago. First one's from Stephanie Payne. Yep. Could the spotted cat that they referenced be a bobcat, since they also display spots? So those early explorer accounts talking about seeing a spotted cat.
Absolutely. That's kind of what we have to, you'll never know for certain, because they're historical records from hundreds of years ago. But that was one of the first things that popped in my mind, is possibly they saw a large bobcat. And you have a spotted cat, they call it one thing. They're not used to seeing these North American animals. They're coming from a land far, far away. So that's why it's really cool to have some of these handwritten accounts, but it's really difficult to take them 100% certainty because of you just never know exactly what they saw. Was there
the next one is, do big black cats show up in American Indian folklore? I'm not aware of any tales in the Eastern natives.
Yeah, I hear it talked about, but I don't think any of the tribes have really, like most of the tribes, all the animals that they hold sacred, the coyote, bear, they're animals that are well known that we know about. There may be a story here and there of a mysterious type of cat or a black cat, but again, there's Native American stories of Sasquatch-like animals. So it's those rare, I don't know what I saw type of things that generate the best folklore sometimes. But there's been no like tribes that really hold the Black Panther or anything like that as a common animal or something that they dealt with all the time. So I think they lean more towards some of the folklore and the fables that are passed down.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, Daryl, with the bobcat reference, you know, if those explorers would have come from, well, I guess those were probably like Spanish explorers, right? They would have been early on or something like that.
Yeah, some of the, especially down in the Gulf coastal areas, were more of the Spanish explorers. It's crazy because I always thought growing up, yeah, the first Europeans were 1680, the Virginia colonies and everything. And then I moved to New Mexico, and it's like the Spaniards were there since the 1500s.
Right. Yeah.
And so yeah, it's definitely a lot of Spanish explorers in that southern part of the U.S.
Right. And you know, you would think if there were abundant, you know, spotted cats, bigger cats, they would have taken some specimens and hides and stuff, like, which is typical of those explorations. They would try to, but they may have not had the weaponry to take, you know, a cat during those times either, you know. So
yeah, and I don't doubt the jaguar range was much further than it is now, like we were talking about the coastal states, but without having any evidence of them like going up through the Appalachians, I think some people they extended all the way to Ohio, and there's just not much historical fact or physical evidence of any of that happening.
Yeah.
All right, so the next animal is the Eastern cougar or the cougar. And I've talked about this animal quite a bit if you used to join my other webinars. So what I want to do is just talk about cougars in the eastern half of the U.S. So when we're talking about cougar, I mentioned it before, the cougar is puma concolor. It's a different species than those large Panthera cats. This is the largest cat that we have in North America. And if you look at their range, the most widespread terrestrial animal in the Western Hemisphere being North and South America. This is their range if you would have came on the boat with the early explorers. This is where cougars were found in the 1600s. Unfortunately, now if you look at their current range, it's much, much less. And so it's still quite a bit. They're still an extremely wide-ranging cat. But if you notice here, something happened in the eastern half of the U.S. They're pretty much non-existent anymore. And so what happened there? And again, you can go into historical records, like you can go way back. There's no written records in 300 BC, but you see where one of the things that was interesting, I'd point out here, I don't know if you know this, but during the Pleistocene, apparently cougars in North America were pretty much gone. But it wasn't until about 3000 BC, maybe about 5,000 years ago, that they started coming up through South America again. So then they recolonized the northern half of the Western Hemisphere. So early
the Ice Age, right, Daryl, for everybody,
yes.
the 10,000 BC Ice Age, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
and the Pleistocene was the last period of those major megafauna. I'm going to be a biology nerd, but the megafauna, the saber-toothed cats, the cave bears, we even had sloths. We had horses in North America during the Pleistocene, but a lot of those died out. And there's debate on what caused that mass extinction. Besides the Ice Age, they think humans had a lot of influence on a lot of those extinctions. So, but when you get to recorded history, early 1500s, the Spanish explorers started reporting seeing these cougars in North America. And it was pretty interesting because even in the 1500s, they were persecuted. So Jesuit priests in California, they were paying bounties, rewarding some of the Native Americans for every cougar they killed. And so bounties started popping up early North America time period. So 1600s, 1700s. And as you can imagine, for folks that were living on the land, and when you're living on the land in a untamed country, everyone has a gun on them. And so cougars and wolves and bears and all sorts of large animals were pretty much shot on sight. The predators, however, they weren't tolerated because they were seen as competition. And so you see pictures of people just shooting anything and everything that they can, especially from a predator standpoint. We waged a war on cougars and wolves and bears throughout North America. And so before long, I don't know if anyone can recognize. Greg, do you know what this is a picture supposedly is?
I've seen it before, but I know I've seen it before. I can't remember really what it's supposed to be.
This is supposedly the last Eastern cougar.
Was it Maine, right? It's supposed to have been in Maine.
Yeah, Stephanie said it. Last Eastern cougar.
What was that supposed to be killed in Maine?
Yeah, and here's the thing: like when the cougar, I don't know what year the cougars were listed. The Eastern cougar subspecies was listed by the Fish and Wildlife Service as endangered, and they had this animal, and I do think it was killed in the Northeast. This was supposedly the last Eastern cougar subspecies. And so Fish and Wildlife Service, I don't know, back in 2011, they finally declared Eastern cougars extinct. There was this exhaustive multi-decade study where they were trying to find evidence of cougars living anywhere in the East outside of the Florida Everglades. Right. And there's no document, no record, no anything, can't find cougars anywhere. So the Fish and Wildlife Service pretty much declared them extinct. And then this thing called genetics comes along, and we find out that, guess what? There's not all these different subspecies of cougars across North America. They're pretty much all the exact same subspecies. So even these Florida Panthers, which they're still calling them a different subspecies, it's all the same type of animal that ranged all across North America. So
there, I was gonna say there, the last Eastern cougar there, is it supposed to be 1930 something in Maine? Is that what they were saying it was, or something? When in the 30s?
I don't recall the year. It could be 1930s, but it's pretty interesting because if you look at Tennessee, I think 1920s, like there was the one up on Spence Field.
Yeah, the Spence Field one was supposed to be in the 20s. Yeah.
That was a descendant of the Sparks cabin. He apparently got into a tussle with it, but that was the last known one. Now, I will tell you, even though we talk about cougars being extirpated from the East for well over 100 years, most of the major Northeastern states that have a ton of people, they probably absolutely have been wiped out. But just like the Appalachians, there could have been pockets that hung on longer in the early 1900s. So they haven't been completely gone. There might have been pockets, but as far as we know, for the last 80, 90 years, we have no evidence of finding any of them. So if you look at the cougar range, and I'm going to show a whole bunch of different maps, and we get map happy here if we want. I think TWRA actually published this one, but this is a rough idea. It's not exact. People always complain about maps because they like to pinpoint discrepancies, and you have to understand maps change. The moment you print a map, it's outdated the next day because animals move around. And so roughly most of the cougars in North America or in the United States live in the western half of the US. This hatch mark is where cougars are expanding back into the range. And so there are sightings of cougars all throughout these Midwestern states. You will notice, I mentioned it a couple of times, the Florida Everglades, they have a population. They've always had a population, even though it got really, really low back in the 1980s, I believe. It was down to, I think, 30 or 40 animals. And they were struggling big time genetically because it was a bottleneck. It was siblings mating with siblings. Yeah. And so because of the genetic work and finding out that like all cougars in North America are the same, they brought in cats from Texas to stimulate that Florida Everglade population, and it did wonders to reduce the genetic inbreeding there. So anyway, this is roughly where cougars are in the United States. Now there's some really cool things. Here's another map, very similar. Most of the cougar range is in the west. All these dots, and there's going to be a lot more dots than this, but all these dots are confirmed sightings. But there's a couple of things that stand out. First, 2011, there's a dot here in Connecticut. And what happened is this cougar got killed. It got struck on a highway in Connecticut. And it was a wild, free-ranging cougar. And it traced back, the lineage traced back to the Black Hills. And so the cool thing was, over the year or so prior, there was some documented there was some DNA from a scat. There was a trail camera picture that showed the path where it went through southern Canada and dropped back down into New York and then got hit by a car in Connecticut. Why they go on these long distance jaunts? Obviously, young juveniles are often looking for their own territory or breeding females. But sometimes they go on these long walkabouts. The one that you guys are probably really familiar with, 2015, it was, hey, I spent most of my career in Tennessee, and a few months after I leave Tennessee, they get their first cougar sighting. That particular cougar sighting, and all these dots in Tennessee are the same cat, believe it or not. They all trace back the lineage to the Black Hills. So it's western cats that are expanding eastward. Now, I will tell you, in 2008, there was a cougar that was shot by a hunter right along that Georgia-Alabama line. He actually got prosecuted because that turned out to be a Florida panther, which are classified as an endangered. Dang. They're a distinct population, and they're classified as endangered. And so he got prosecuted, paid tremendous fines, but that was killed up on the Georgia-Alabama line. And that cat came from Florida. So all of this to say, range expansion is real. And there's always a chance of an occasional wanderer, but I'm going to put a caveat on that. So if you look at, this is the last map I'll show, but I like it because the green is where we know there's cats living and breeding and reproducing. This grayish area is where there's cats that are found there all the time. They're still trying to document reproduction in a lot of these states. You have that population in the Florida Everglades there, but occasionally cats do move here. I will tell you, people use this as an out all the time because they will claim they saw a cougar in Pennsylvania or Maryland or whatever, and their fallback, oh, it's just a wanderer. That excuse would work a whole lot better if it was 50 years ago. But as each day progresses, there are more and more and more trail cameras out in the woods. In Tennessee alone, we estimated a few 100,000. And so you cannot walk anywhere in the woods for too long without having your picture taken. So this idea of cats wandering all over the East, that is not happening. When a cat wanders through the East, we'll know about it within a short period of time. So wait a darn tootin' minute. People all over the East are seeing cougars. Remember that cat I was telling you about in Tennessee? That cat arrived after I left, but it arrived in 2015, October of 2015. And there's a couple of ways you can confirm a cougar, either through photography or through DNA or a carcass. And so this photo showed up, it was actually September of 2015. And this came in West Tennessee. And it's like, dang it, we actually have a mountain lion here in West Tennessee. And obviously the body shape, one of the telltale signs is a black-tipped, long, thick tail. And sure enough, about a week later, there's another picture of it that showed up. It was about 70 miles east of where it originally showed up. And then sure enough, you go a few months later, and we start getting pictures all over the place of this cat that actually took up residence along the Tennessee River, or just the Tennessee River goes in and out of Tennessee a couple of times, but is near the Tennessee River corridor. And he kind of hunkered down there for a little bit. And then the following February, he got up and started walking, and he walked all the way down and was in Wayne County almost a year later. So there was about 10 different photographs over the course of the year, which goes to show there's enough trail cameras out there that they will be picked up on trail camera given enough time. And so unfortunately, that cat disappeared soon after that. So we had 10 pictures of this cat, and immediately everyone's saying, see, we told you there's cougars in Tennessee. Now do you believe us? And so did that event prove that cougars were in Tennessee all along? I suggest the opposite. It actually proves that Tennessee does not have cats. One cat showed up in September, and we got 10 photographs of it within less than a year. And so, and just so you know, we haven't had a single photograph of a cougar in Tennessee since that 2016 event, 2015/16 event. And so that goes to show that, well, I think it proves pretty conclusively, can't say 1000%, but pretty conclusive that if cougars were living in Tennessee, we would still be getting photographs of them all the time. And so what about all those? There's literally thousands of observations every year. And the people, if I heard it once, I heard it 1,000 times. They'll say, I saw it with my own eyes. Well, let's talk a little bit about your eyes. Actually, let's talk about Steve Buscemi's eyes. So you see this photo here of Steve Buscemi, an actor, and I'll turn him upside down. You see him there, and it's like, okay, we got one right side up, one upside down. But then I didn't realize it, but you flip that up, and it's like his eyes were like totally messed up. But I never noticed it when he was this other way around. I didn't realize his eyes were so messed up. So it's like, gosh darn it, why didn't my eyes pick that up? Because your eyes are trained to fill in gaps. And so let's think about this. I'm sure as a kid or even as an adult, many of us have enjoyed magic shows. And so you go to see a magician perform, and he does these tricks, and you know they're tricks. You're trying to catch him messing up. You're trying to figure out how he does the tricks. And if he's a good magician, he will fool you, and you still can't figure out how he's doing those tricks. So your eyes can be fooled even when your brain is saying, this isn't possible. So why does this play into the whole I seen a cougar type argument? Now, imagine your brain, instead of trying to figure out exactly what it is, imagine your brain helping you see that cougar. Because here's what happened, folks. Humans lived in the wild for hundreds of thousands of years, and they had a rough life. They were on the landscape with lots of other big critters that could kill them. And so their eyes and their brain, in order to survive, you had to see danger, and you had to see danger fast. You couldn't, if you saw something moving in the bushes, if you didn't recognize it right away as something that would kill you, and you're too slow to think about it, you got killed. And so your brain convinces you to see that big, scary animal the moment you think something is there. And so with your eyes playing tricks on you, your brain is even forcing your eyes to play tricks on you. And I love this. I don't know if anyone remembers this clip. I wish I had the video, but
this reporter, right? This is the reporter. Isn't it a reporter, right?
Yeah, a reporter. She was out in Utah, and this was about 6-7 years ago. And she was doing a report. Obviously, it was at dark. And as she's talking, I wish I had the video, but as she's talking, this animal walks up to her, and she's like, and this animal is coming near me, and I'm not sure what it is. And she just holds still, and it walks right by her. And then Good Morning America played this clip and everything. And if you look at the animal, it's got a brown coloration. You can't see the head too. You can see some ears here, but the tail, it's got a little black tip on the, or dark tip on the tail. They were getting hundreds of thousands of people writing in to say, dude, that was a cougar that just walked by you. How did you stay still? And literally hundreds of thousands of people saw this cougar with their own eyes. And the cool thing was, the person that owned this dog, it turned out to be a dog. He even sent in pictures. He's like, that's my dog, Wilbur, and showed a picture, and it looked just like that. But everybody that saw the video, and when Good Morning America played it, they were all seeing a cougar, and it wasn't a cougar. So it just goes to show that your eyes can easily be tricked. And so that, my friends, is why eyewitness accounts, when it comes to verifying where these animals live, we simply, as a biologist, we can't use them as proof. And I'll do that again if you saw the cat run across. It's funny because one of the very first people when I was working for TWRA, when I mentioned about how we don't have Black Panthers, actually, it was someone that worked in our accounting division. They're like, yes, we do. And she's like, me and my husband saw one. And so I was truly intrigued. And I'm like, can you tell me about what happened? And she started out, no lie, Greg. She was, well, me and my husband, we were coming home from the bar. It was about 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah, I've heard this story. Like, someone else.
Yeah. So anyway, so here's the thing, folks. If we can't trust our eyes, at least we can trust the news. I gotta laugh at that because I'll show you a couple of things that drive me nuts. So
Stephanie has a question in the chat. Just we could address.
Yeah, no, I apologize. I can't see the.
Yeah, I can't see it with your screen sharing. So she's asking, in areas of the country that are more used to cougars, i.e., Western states, is there as much misidentification with things like bobcats, dogs, and domestic cats? Which is kind of funny because that was Utah in that report, right, where the misidentification was the dog, right? But do you see it as much in the Western states, misidentification of cougars, or no?
No, there is still misidentification without a doubt. There's still occasional Black Panther sightings, but it is these people are used to living in an area that they have these animals, and so they're not as. I just have not experienced the same amount of misidentifications in the West that I experienced in the East. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Part of the misidentification in the East is people wanting it to be, right? Whereas in the West, no one's wanting it to be the cougar, because if it is, it's not some novel thing anyway, right? So
exactly, it's like it's not a story that you can't wait to tell all your friends. So, I put this up there. This was a story out of DeSoto County, Mississippi, that was raging. The guy filmed a cat in the field, and he was talking about how big it is. They actually sent a reporter out there to cover this, originally as a Black Panther, then they were talking as a cougar, and then he was out there, and it was just feral cat. This thing was actually, that's not even super tall grass. And so the cat is getting lost in the tall grass, and he was actually chasing a mouse. So, I just wanted to show you a couple of things, and this is why I enjoyed my job so much in Tennessee, because I was often seen as the cougar detective. Now, remember, as a biologist, I wanted to find cougars. I wanted to find evidence of it, but I needed irrefutable evidence. I just couldn't take someone's word for it. And I do want to give a shout out to Stephanie, Greg. I think I mentioned Stephanie to you.
Yeah, I know Stephanie. We years ago in the park one time. She was around.
Yeah, she helped me. She helped me with a bunch of these cougar investigations, believe it or not. And so, what are people seeing? And this is what I'd get when I'd be at work. They're like, "Oh, we got a picture of a cougar in the cove." It's like, yeah, I can't take that. I'm sorry. Or then I'd get a picture like this and say, "I got a picture of a cougar on the trail camera." I'm like, well, I can't really confirm that, but do you see the big honking raccoon on the tree there? These are some of the other photos that they knew that they got it. Can't tell what that is. I would lean more towards a fox for that one. This one was a cougar picture that someone sent. I think that's more of a house cat walking by. You could tell by body conformation or morphology that the shape of the animal tells a lot. But the ones that would, like, you just breathe, it's not a sigh of release. It's more of a gasp. But they're like, see, I got a picture of a cougar. No, you got a picture of a bobcat. This was sent to me as a cougar. Again, and I understand where people could be confused, especially when you don't see all the pieces of it. But this, again, is a bobcat. The scary one, this was sent to me as a cougar. Believe it or not, Greg, this was sent by one of the TWA commissioners.
I believe that.
So anyway, the reason I say you cannot trust the news, I fought with
Daryl, I think the tail on the bobcats just gets disregarded. I don't know, know, people just want it to be, they see, and I'll say this, Daryl, I've never seen a bobcat or a cougar free ranging in the wild. I've only seen a cougar. I've seen a cougar twice, once caught in a trap, and then once in a vet clinic where they were putting down a cougar from Tiger Haven at UT. Yeah. And when I walked in the room with that cougar at UT that was being put down from Tiger Haven, and I was only standing 10 feet from it, I was like, holy crap, that's a big animal, right? Yeah. Like, it was much bigger than, and I think when people see these bobcat pictures and they're not really sure how big a bobcat's supposed to be, maybe they're taller than they would have expected, and they just don't know bobcats can actually be, kind of long and tall looking body wise, but they have no idea how big a cougar is supposed to be.
Right.
I run into, and it's like, even if you think you saw a big bobcat isn't even the size of a small.
It's 30, 35 pounds.
And like, oh, that tail's kind of long. That tail's kind of long. It's like, no. That tail isn't anywhere near as long as it needs to be. It needs to be a 6 foot long tail, So it's, I may be exaggerating. I don't think the tails are quite 6 feet, but they're crazy long.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And there's certain identifying features that you get a lot of black and white photos. You can't see it too well in here, but one of the things we look for especially is the ear markings. Now, right. Cougars will have a similar type of pattern on the back of their ear, but it's not a stark white. Bobcats will have a stark white, almost surrounded by black. And cougars could have a different coloration on the back of their ears, but it's usually whenever you see that stark white difference right away, it's a bobcat. But one of the news agencies was running the story of this cougar tormenting It was actually north central Tennessee. It was actually on the Kentucky line, and they interviewed a sheriff who was the one reporting these cougars. People need to stay in their house, and they ran a number of stories. People were sending in pictures, and the news agency was saying, "Oh, a mountain lion captured on trail camera." This is a house cat, folks. You can see it almost has a dark striped tail and the mottled coloration, but they were reporting it as a mountain lion. The funniest thing, and I blew into him when I saw it, but the sheriff was interviewed because he was supposedly the most knowledgeable guy there. He held up a picture that his buddy took of the cougar, and immediately I recognized it as one of the original TWA photos from that West Tennessee cougar. So the sheriff was caught red-handed, not telling the truth. Anyway, I will tell you, and I'm almost done here, but sometimes we had some really cool things that made me go, huh. So I was working as the big game coordinator, and I received this photo. This was up on the Cumberland Plateau. I think it was Cumberland County, actually. And they sent this picture of this cat from a trail camera. And when you zoom in, it's like, huh, that's got a cool look to it. And so before you just go, oh, yeah, we got cougars, you kind of want to do some investigation. And so I contacted the person. I'm like, do you have any other photos from this trail camera? And actually, I think Stephanie helped me with this one too. So he sent in another picture of deer there. And it's great when you have a trail camera that has multiple pictures of different animals in there, you can superimpose them. And when you put the two photos together, and you can see this log lines up perfectly, that cat suddenly shrinks down from being mountain lion size to being able to walk underneath that deer, no problem. And like you said, a cougar is a big animal. It's weight-wise, it's almost the same as the deer. And so you knew right away this was more than likely a bobcat, or it could have been a house cat, but it definitely wasn't a cougar. So anyway, I'm going to summarize here. Now, I hope I didn't offend anyone by downplaying their cougar sighting. I hope you saw a cougar, but as a biologist, we can't really take anything as proof positive unless we have physical evidence. So in summary, cougars have long been extirpated from the eastern U.S., except for the Florida population. Now, I will tell you, they have been moving eastward. A couple more states I don't know if you know this, Greg, but a couple more states just recently documented breeding population. That upper peninsula of Michigan actually confirmed a breeding female there. And then anyway, bottom line, cougars and large cats, they captivate the mind. And therefore, that mind captivates the eye, and they help each other out. So that's why we see, or we have reports of all these cougars still in the eastern half of the U.S. Now, Black Panthers, just no. we never have Black Panthers in the U.S. Never been documented, never been known. So unless someone brought in a jaguar or a leopard from another continent, another country, and accidentally lost it, that is the only explanation we have for them being here. So with that, photo credits, huge thank you to a bunch of people I used their photos. And with that, I think I'm done. And I'll leave something up here while I answer any more questions anyone may have.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Daryl. Everyone, we got 24 people here, so feel free to type a question in the chat, or if you're brave enough, turn on your camera and your microphone. You can ask it out loud. Okay, no one yet.
I might stop sharing to see if they.
Yeah, you can. Then you can see the chat. PJ says, any word on the tie-dyed T-shirts? Yeah. Did we got new ones ordered, right?
Yeah, we have them ordered.
We have
they
more.
Should be ready soon.
The green tie-dye. We have more of the green tie-dye shirts ordered. So I know those were a big hit. We weren't sure if this was going to be a hit, and now they are. We got to get more. Daryl, we'll send you a green tie-dye shirt.
I appreciate it.
big item this year. Yeah. Any other questions about big cats? Anybody here want to admit that maybe they haven't seen one they thought they had, or still holding true to that?
I have a question.
Oh, here we go. Go ahead.
Do you feel that mountain lions are going to do anything for the wild hog problem? Like, do they eat enough wild hogs for them to even make a dent in anything?
Daryl, you want to answer that first? I'll give my opinion after. You go ahead and give
your... the thing when it comes to predators like true carnivores, like cougars and wolves, they have to kill an animal. They eat fresh meat all the time. I will tell you that any predator, whether it's a cougar or a wolf, would rather take down an animal that's easy to take down. So if a cougar has the choice between going after a wild hog or a deer, it's going after the deer. It's much easier to take that animal down. They don't want to risk injury. And so cougars will feed on pigs when that's all they can get. But I don't think they're going to have any major impact on the hog population, mostly because they didn't evolve eating hogs. Hogs were introduced in the 1600s. So we're only a few hundred years in to them living together. So they haven't figured out the pig situation yet. So Greg?
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think with feral pigs from domestic stock, a cougar can take those pretty easy. But if you talk about the wild boar that we've got in the Smokies, they're real tough animals. I've killed a couple hundred of them myself. And I've, been impressed by their toughness, to say the least. I mean, they're about as tough as bears. And sure, piglets, compromised, sick animals, sure, would a cougar take them down? But when I think about cougars, and their distribution, their density, and if a cougar even lived in the Smokies, let's say 2 cougars lived in this whole national park. I think they'd prey on deer, and they'd go after the opportunistic hog when they could. They might go after an elk calf, and every other thing else they can get. But I think with the densities that cougars live in, they just wouldn't really make a dent. A pack of wolves, maybe they can make a dent. Wild boar live in Russia with tigers, So, you got to give wild boar and hogs a lot of credit. They survive in other parts of this world where there are some of the most fearsome top predators out there. You got wild boar in Siberia overlap with the brown bears and tigers and everything. That's pretty wild. They survive there. So I don't think anything's going to ever put a dent in hogs. We think we're pretty smart, and I think that they're just going to be here when we're gone, personally.
And then I had someone send me a thing the other day about how it talked, because I'm from Texas, but talked about how they were having trouble with how bears were stealing food from mountain lions, and how mountain lions catch like 6 times more than they have to because they don't fight with bears. Is that true?
Can I get nerdy on you? Yeah. What you just described is called kleptoparasitism.
Right.
And it's becoming an issue. Like cougars on the totem pole, when they make a kill, a bear is easily going to push it off, and even a black bear. In fact, I'm so glad you brought this up, because one of the podcasts we did recently, we were talking about like finding a deer carcass up in a tree. And immediately people automatically, it's amazing. If someone posts that on social media, 95% of the people are saying, oh, that's a cougar. Cougars do not drag their kills up in trees. They cache their prey, that carcass on the ground. They bury it under leaves and debris and twigs. They don't carry it up in the trees. Reason being, cougars evolved with bears in North America, grizzlies and black bears. But black bears were found all over North America, just like cougars used to be. Guess what could climb trees better than cougars? Black bears. So evolutionarily, it would be absolutely stupid for a cougar to drag a deer up into a tree to say, here's what I killed. And a bear could take it so easily. So sorry for that side tangent, but that's one of my pet peeves when people claim cougars drag their kill up in the trees. But what they're finding is, as bear populations have been increasing, cougar populations and bear populations have been increasing, because we were in bleak times, late 1800s, early 1900s. Lots of these large animal populations were really depressed. And so they've been coming back. And what they're finding is, when you have a lot of bears in an area where cougars live, cougars have a hard time killing an animal and eating it before a bear steals it. So they're finding cougars have to kill at a higher frequency as the black bear population comes back. So it definitely can have, I know in the East, Greg, you said it wouldn't have an impact. Well, you didn't say that.
I was saying the density with just the number of cougars that would be in the area. Yeah. If there were a lot of them, sure. You know.
Yeah, in the West, you have to understand deer densities are much, much lower than in the East. And so they are finding some locations in the West where there's not as many deer. They can absolutely have an impact on deer populations. So
yeah. And you know, I would say to that, Daryl, I was in Yellowstone for a season, and I was, you know, wondering why we just didn't have a lot of sign of cougars in Yellowstone. And, you know, part of it's just Yellowstone's a harsh place, right? But we caught a cougar in a bear trap on the north boundary of Yellowstone. But when you get into the interior, there's not a lot of signs of cougars, you know. And the interior of Yellowstone, you know, does have pretty high grizzly bear density, and obviously you got all kinds of other game. But the guy I was working with had been there since he was a kid, and you know, he'd only seen 2 cougars, and they were always kind of outside or on the edge of Yellowstone. And he was just talking about how hard it is to be a cougar, especially with the wolves and the grizzly bears all overlap. And he's like, man, cougars are kind of, you know, always running, you know, trying to find something else, because they got to kill something, eat as much as they can fresh, and then get out of there, because the grizzly bears and the wolves are always coming. You know, the grizzly bears steal stuff from everybody, right? You know, I was like, you know what? I bet it is hard to be a cougar in Yellowstone, that complete ecosystem. And you probably don't have a high density of cougars because it's a really competitive environment there. And you know, the prey densities play a big role in that. And that's kind of why I think in the Smokies, I just don't know how many cougars we could support. And I think a cougar would just go after the deer. Why would you stay in the mountains? You'd go down in the valleys and you just live on deer, right? Why make it hard for yourself? You know, chasing wild boar in the mountains. No, there's deer plenty in Middle Tennessee. Why would you even go to East Tennessee? It's, you know, stay in the middle.
Absolutely. And a lot of people think, I have to laugh, because we paid the University of Tennessee lots of money to do a bear study to find out where bears would live in Tennessee. I think I told you this, and the results of all their modeling efforts, because they looked at where they found bears in Tennessee, and they said bears need high elevations and no humans around, so roadless areas. And it's like, thanks, but how do you explain all the bears in Florida if they need high elevation? And how do you explain all the bears in New Jersey if they can only live where there's no people? Anyway.
Well, Stephanie had a question there, Daryl. She said, any data coming out of Texas where there are large populations of cougars and feral pigs? You know, I don't know a whole lot of people in Texas. I met some at a workshop that were there about bears, you know, because their bear populations are returning. And we ended up talking about how many invasive species there are in Texas of all different kinds of, you know, mammals, and how if they didn't shoot them from helicopters, they'd be overrun. So I can only imagine that the cougars in Texas really aren't doing enough. If the people I know in Texas are just, you know, gunning what are they called? Outad and Outad and those other Barbary sheep, right? Which are actually more like a goat. And Nilgai. I mean, you know, you'd think if you were a cougar in Texas with all those invasive animals, but what you were saying, Daryl, you know, they didn't evolve with them, and evolution plays a big role in the prey selection of a carnivore. From what I've read, it seems like, you know, it's just millennia of adaptations.
I tell you, if you're looking, like, one of the things that we're doing more and more studies on is we have this wild horse issue in the West.
Right.
And some people say they're not wild horses, they're feral horses. We were hoping that cougars could help control that because of the Wild Horse and Burro Act. There can be no lethal control of those horses. And so we're wondering if cougars were going to have an impact on them. And it's one of the same things. They will kill a horse, like, if that's all that's left, but that's not their primary prey source. They evolved going after deer and elk. And so if you're used to eating one thing, that's your go-to staple that you're going to continue to go to as long as it's there. So
yeah, it would take many more years to really adapt to another prey. I mean, from what we know of, evolution, pigs, another 1,000 years from now, I hope something's figured out how to eat them, besides us,
All right.
So,
I can't see any chat. Is there any other
stuff? Let us know if we had any baby goats. We got triplets due soon.
But not from the goat that Greg thought was originally pregnant.
The goat I thought was pregnant did not get pregnant. She's a dud. So my other one is pregnant, though. We'll have them soon.
So I do have a question for you. So the original map you showed the Western Hemisphere and it as the cougar as the largest populated animal, basically predator in the whole area. So with the other large apex predators around, you can't really go with the thought that it was the top predator. We know what caused it to decimate, and that was us as people, but what allowed it to grow to such a large population with so many other predators in this area that could have decimated as well?
Well, understand that just because they're found all over North America, like, the density of animals could be seriously impacted. Like, where you have lots of bears and wolves, you'll still have cougars, but it might not be as many cougars as if you're in an area where there are no bears or wolves. The cougar density can be high. Now, understand, cougar density is never like deer density. As an apex predator, they don't overpopulate too much. But you can have cougars living amongst all those other apex predators, but at probably much lower density. And so what they typically end up doing is finding their own little niche where they can survive without too much conflict with those other predators. And so, it's pretty cool. There's all this historical evidence of them pretty much wandering all over North America in the early 1500s. And so, early 1500s, we had lots of wolves in all of North America and black bears, and they coexisted. But I imagine it was much lower densities than if those other two prey item or two predators were not on the landscape.
And the prey species too, Daryl. You would have had way more elk herds, bison herds, deer. It's across all those same regions. So, removing their prey was also a big part of killing out cougars at the same time.
That is a tremendous point, Greg, because competition usually boils down to the amount of resources. You can have a grizzly and a wolf and a cougar all feeding in the same field because there's 100 dead bison in the field. Like, they're not going to fight each other just because they don't like each other. They fight when they're competing for whatever food is left there. And so when the food resources are abundant, they can live in harmony. And like Greg just said, early 1800s, you got a lot more other prey items. Bison were in all the way to the east. You had elk all the way in the eastern half as well. So there's a lot more food available. So all three of those apex predators could live together without too much conflict. Good question, though. Very good.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're at 9:10 on the East Coast here, so I know people got to get to bed. Thank you guys for having us. Thank you, Daryl.
Yeah, thanks, Daryl.
We'll be doing more of these. We'll call on Daryl again.
Mostly bears, but sometimes knobs.
Yeah, we'll find some fun stuff like Cougars talk about with Daryl for sure.